Response video number 2 to Hythlodays video. Sorry, I'm trying to move this, and it's always dangerous. Trying to do anything around here is dangerous. Really busy, but anyway, so I did watch his video, took some notes, and I wish I could have made this video a few hours ago, but it just didn't work out that way. When things were more current, but I'll maybe play the end of his video and deal with some of the stuff at the ending, but we'll see how much time I have. I don't know, 40 minutes is on the camera. But anyway, alright, so I left off at like 25 minutes into his video, and so he made some sort of analogy to what's good business, and so using the business kind of metaphor for defining utilitarianism. Basically just creating this idea that it's profit and there's no other profit loss, and for the utilitarian it would be just this valuing what you're valuing, okay, in terms of the gain being, for the negative utilitarian, the idea of eliminating the negative, eliminating any kind of suffering or deprivation, and for the regular utilitarian who might value joy or pleasure that isn't related to satisfaction of a hard need or a real need, that would have some value, and that would be the thing you're exchanging, and there's these absolute rules and blah blah blah. And I'm sort of inclined to say yes, but what I think what breaks the game is the fact that we have this uncertainty in terms of result. Okay, it's not cut and dry in terms of a lot of circumstances. You don't know what the outcome is going to be, and without that certain knowledge, I mean, a 50-50 roll of the dice, would you want your life to be on a 50-50 roll of the dice? Wouldn't you want more information before you make a decision? If I said, there's a 50-50 chance you're going to be killed tomorrow, you'd be kind of interested to understand what the probabilities are, what the threat is, and try to figure out some way to figure out what the threat is. You wouldn't just want to face a day where there's this 50-50 chance and you're just sitting there with it. You can't do much with that in a business environment either. Okay, if somebody tells you there's a 50% chance, that you'll lose everything, or you'll lose $50,000, or whatever the thing is. Those are it messes up any kind of equation. And that's where you get into intent, because intent has a lot to do with assessing a probability and accepting responsibility for an outcome. So somebody can intend good because they're ignorant, or somebody can pretend to intend good and be willfully ignorant, in the sense that they were hoping for the best result even though they had no reason to have any hope, kind of a thing. But anyway, obviously intent, you'd want intent to be to have the right result, not just whatever the personal profit would be. So, and again, this whole thing comes down to the fact that we are, like, there's a point in his video where he implies that I'm saying I'm the only one who understands, I'm the only one who feels, or some kind of crap, and I'm not saying anything like that. What I'm saying, though, is that through your personal experience you become one of a class, and that class will exist in the future. If I was a black man, I would know that black people are going to exist in the future, and if I was aggressively advocating for black people rights, then I would do things in the world now to protect rights for black people in the future, that kind of thing. So yes, you only understand it because you're one of them now, so you'll know what those people are in the future, and you're just saying that basically I'm an advocate to protect those people from the people who are ignoring them. And they're ignoring them now in the present, and they'll ignore them in the future unless something changes. So that's why I'm advocating for a change. So, but it's, I appreciate Hythloday taking the time. He played the video, most of it, and he gave me his thoughts. But there was I find the video more elucidating to his attitude than the live conversation we had. And he certainly was less offensive in the live conversation. So I think he knew that he couldn't get away with what he was getting away with in the video in a live conversation. I mean, there's another point where he talked like it was all just an emotional thing. Like, yeah, I've been spending 50 years developing a philosophy based on because I have an emotion, because I have a skin knee and I'm all panicked about it or something. I mean, just this trivialization that just really irritating. Especially when, he's the one making arguments that, again, I could say were... He repeated Thunderfoot's stupid line that the philosophy dies out. It doesn't die out if I don't reproduce. Okay? I was not a product of the philosophy. I was a convert. And I wasn't converted by a force other than acquisition of understanding. So I didn't even have to be converted by an antinatalist to become an antinatalist. So it is ludicrous to say the philosophy lives or dies based on what I do. That is not the truth. It's not a reasonable suggestion because it's not how the philosophy has developed, or it has nothing to do with the fact that it exists. It exists because we've basically really killed God. God is getting deader by the minute, and the more dead God gets, the more alive the realization that we're all being manipulated by a DNA molecule is going to become. People are going to start waking up and saying, well, there's a consequence to unintelligent design, and the consequence is, yeah, it's not a very good design. Duh. So, don't patronize me with your just an emotional philosophy. Sorry, no sale. Did we enter World War II just as emotionally? I mean, it's just stupid. Did they end slavery emotionally? I mean, just fuck you and that crap. I mean, yeah, like I said, if you did that in the live conversation, it likely would have provoked a reaction. But anyway, don't want to key on these things. All right. So the next thing was the the evaluation of risk. So risk of a high. So he took what I was trying to point out, that there's a low risk of a high negative. Very few people will be the elephant man. Very few people will, say, statistically, spend more than 12 months, let's say, in a mental institution. It's not something that most people are going to have to experience, but a very few people are going to experience the very worst of it. Okay, the very worst of psychotic episode. And for those people, the suffering will be intense and profoundly large. And I haven't even got into brain tumors and all the different kinds of bizarre diseases that people can get that you would pay real money to avoid. Okay, you might even scrounge up every penny you own if I told you it's the only way you could avoid having this disease. You would give up every cent you own to buy your way out of it if you could do that. And you know it's that bad. You wouldn't want it on the worst of bets. And that's the point being made here, is that the payment is not evenly distributed to all the life forms. No, some people pay a hell of a lot. They pay the full measure of the price, like the dead on the battlefield in World War II. Some pay the highest price, and some pay nothing. And that unevenness messes with perspective. And I'm saying honest perspective has to take it into account that if you weren't willing to have the worst of it, if you aren't willing to draw the smallest straw, then you probably shouldn't be drawing straws. Not that complicated. If you knew the outcome was going to be your child is going to be the elephant man, would you pull the straw for him? No, you wouldn't. So anyway, and so you're just playing a game of risk. You're playing a gambling game with something else's welfare where you pay nothing. And so if the price was you had to be the victim, maybe you wouldn't be so quick to draw straws. Anyway, Um, yeah. Okay, so let's see. No parachute? I know that's not what I wrote, but need not understand. Need not understanding. Minority. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what he need. There was something he said that I tried to, and it just didn't come out of my notes at all. Um, so anyway, um, is all risk um, of doing harm unacceptable? So that was his question. That was a direct quote. Um, and in a sense, yes. Okay, I mean, in a sense, all risk is unacceptable because there's nothing you can describe here that's happening on planet Earth that is not happening on Mars, and no one's missing it not happening on Mars. There's no evidence that Mars is running a deficit because it doesn't contain what's happening on Earth. There's no rational description of this deficit, the badness of it, the weight of it. So I guess in a sense you could argue that any harm is too much to pay. As a little kitten in the cold shivering, meowing, is probably too much to pay for this silly game. It's that bad a game. And I think it's much worse a game than that, but and certainly what the whole thing isn't sitting balanced on the welfare of one little kitten. Okay, so but I would argue that that's all it would need. That's how vacuous the gain is. The profit is so vacuous. You're not satisfying a need that doesn't exist in your own creation. You create the need by existing. The need doesn't exist before you exist. It exists when you exist. And that's the problem with this life game. Is it doesn't satisfy a need that pre-existed it. It creates the need and then satisfies some portion of it very inefficiently. You call that a broken machine. You call that unfunctional. A machine that consumes more than it produces is not a machine you turn on. It's a machine you turn off. Alright. You rejected the using nuclear power as a metaphor for the fact that you have to make a decision, cost to benefit, risk to benefit equation, and you have to do this risk analysis. And somehow you rejected that metaphor as being valid somehow, like somehow this is some other subject, and somehow that's about propaganda, or that's about this. Certainly you can characterize anything in a different light. I could say that air travel is unsafe because, and then I could use statistics based on accidents per hour of flying time, or I could use accidents per miles traveled. Now, if I did accidents per hour, the number would be much higher than if I did accidents per miles traveled, right? So yeah, I can skew statistics to my advantage to make my argument. But we're not talking about that, are we? Are you going to make the accusation that I'm propagandizing heavily? No, I don't think I am. If I really wanted to propagandize heavily and take advantage of the emotionalism, then yeah, I would play these videos and just show you pictures all day of the horror you're imposing. But I don't do that. I describe some of it, but I don't shove it in your face. So I don't think I'm propagandizing hard. Frankly, that would be fair to the argument. That wouldn't even be propaganda because it wouldn't be a lie. Propaganda would require me to distort perspective in some way, to somehow overdo it. And I don't think I could overdo it. I mean, I could just explain to people how many animals right now, how many sentient apes, monkeys, simians, are being tortured in laboratories every day for their, health care progress, and how there's no justification for that. It's no better than tormenting or torturing retarded humans. And it's only done because of religious dogma that allows this distinction to be made, that somehow all animals are the same, and if they're not food, they're just things to laugh at. A silly and idiotic propagandist perspective. So I think the propaganda is all on your side of the argument. The hopeful and the wishy-washy and mishy-mushy, pink panty wearing Pollyannas are the ones who have distorted reality and pretended that this game of slaughter we're playing is of no consequence, because they've negated the conscious reality of all the other sentient animals on this planet. That's propaganda. So anyway, he was rather derogatory in referencing this whole idea that somehow we have to be experts in risk analysis to do this, or somehow you have to have a degree in something. I don't think that's at all necessary. But anyway, so his argument was, how do you assess risk? And I'm not saying it's done easily, but it has to be done. You can't just say, well, because it's not easy, I'm not going to do it, because we know it means something. It means something if there's a 1 in 10 chance that if you go to the store, you're going to run somebody over. I mean, these statistics mean something, and risk means something. You can't just say it doesn't exist. You can't pretend it away. You have to acknowledge it, and I think the acknowledgement is to just recognize its existence and calculate it in a net effect. Because the net effect eliminates the probabilistic uncertainty. If you go with the net results, you know, okay, what the end results are going to be, and you don't have to worry about whether in this instant it's going to work or not, because you know overall what's going to happen. And so that can be a huge benefit if you have the option to judge it as an entire game. And again, that's the fundamental premise of this argument, is acknowledgement of the fact that this game is something we all we either vote for or don't vote for it. I'm advocating that I'm saying I am voting against it, and I'm advocating that people vote against it. You seem to be claiming that I'm saying I have some authority, or I'm taking all the world's problems on, or all this other crap, and that's not the argument. The argument that it's wrong, I'm saying it's wrong, and I'm suggesting to other people that they ought to be honest and say it's wrong. Not complicated. Alright, then he used the fact that I've made some videos lamenting about the dysfunctionality of YouTube, as if I'm conceding my argument isn't working. That's not what I'm saying in those videos. I'm not saying my argument's not working. I'm saying this medium is no good for doing philosophy. No philosophy's winning on this medium. Retardation is winning. Cute kitty's winning. That was my argument, is that the subject of philosophy, serious thought in general, is failing dismally on the internet. And that's the tragedy. What I'm saying is, if anybody ever did take this philosophy stuff seriously, if there was a fair and open and honest debate of this subject, it's going to kick ass. And I've said that clearly. Yeah, very clearly. It's win all the way against people who pretend that they didn't impose on anything when they had kids. Yeah, I think the non-existent human they create will be pretty easy to prove as not being non-existent. Anyway, so then I made the argument that it's easier to, in identifying rights and wrongs, it's much easier to, in identifying rights, human rights, that it's easier just to identify human wrongs. Rights are conditional always, and there's no such thing as an absolute right. I mean, it just doesn't go anywhere, because if your right implicates exercising your right, if there was any such right that can be actualized at no expense, even to the waste of your own time, which somebody could argue you have an obligation to fulfill certain obligations, and so you can't waste all of your time because you have to spend some of your time fulfilling your obligations. So you could almost argue that something you did internally, like just watch cartoons, you could almost argue there's a point where you don't have a right to do that if doing that is preventing you from doing, feeding your baby or something, right? As a lot of parents do, right? So yeah, first you have to fulfill the responsibilities. So it's easier just to identify the wrongs or the violation of responsibility and just say everything else is rights. Okay, once you've satisfied your responsibilities, then everything else is yours to play with. And I think that's a perfectly rational way to look at it. So then you ask the question, how do you identify wrongs? And I think wrongs are easily identified as in positions of harm, in positions of a negative consequential impact on sentient beings. Sentient beings experiencing negative sensations, if you precipitate that happening for no benefit, like no greater number of sentients are spared suffering, then you've committed a wrong. You have a deficit in your, bank account, so to speak. Your life worth living account is overdrawn, and you've got to put funds in there to compensate for that. So any individual act can be judged based on its overall impact. It's always going to be the net effect is the only effect that matters. Intent is nice, but it doesn't mean anything because it's a consequential world, it's a cause and effect world, and all that's going to matter in the end is how it came out. You either scored a goal or you didn't. And unfortunately, right? I mean, it comes down to it, right? I mean, the bomb either explodes or the bomb doesn't explode. The lights go on or the lights don't go on when you hit the switch. It's a pass or fail kind of truth reality, and you'll either be productive or you'll be unproductive, and it'll be based on how you play the game with this commodity of your power to affect other sentient beings. And you'll either affect them positively or negatively in terms of obliging them to exist or causing the circumstances that allow them to be abused or harmed, and that's just a fact. And there's going to be a net effect of your existence, and that's it. But I mean, identifying the wrong is fairly easy by the negative utilitarian standard, that the real weight of value, the real weight of positive, if you want to make a real positive and a certain positive, the best thing to do is prevent a negative. It's a certain positive, and it's a strong positive. If you prevent something from suffering, it's a strong positive. Where taking somebody from comfortable to very comfortable is a weak positive. No reliable evidence necessary to what victory would require. I don't know exactly what that was for, but yeah, I mean, the truth is how this battle be fought and how it would be won is always sort of arbitrary. Obviously, sometimes it takes a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King or some other individual to initiate or create gravity that everybody centers around and focuses on, and it creates a cornerstone you build upon, all that kind of, you could use all kinds of metaphors. So who knows how that's going to work out. But yeah, I think the game has only just begun, so to speak. Yeah, and so the expense of creating a life, so that's the old argument. Yeah, that must have been an old note that was still on here. So anyway, I think I've covered it. How much time do I have left? Well, we might have 10 minutes or something, so let's give it a shot. This video should be loaded, and then my screen is tilted wrong. It's funny how just a couple of degrees makes all the difference. Gary and Mendham, that would be it. So I'll play the last few minutes here.
But it fails in regards of the contrast where he says he's given responsibility and supreme control of welfare of these rats. Nobody has said responsibility for us. Kind of, I guess, looking at it now, it seems like Gary is thinking that he in fact does have responsibility for the human race.
Yeah, you find it laughable, but I mean, every character in history who ever did anything did something similar, right? I mean, you go to Jim Brown, you go to lots of circumstances where one individual had to sit there and fight off the government or do this or do that to change something. And they were basically taking it on themselves. And they were basically saying if there was a button they could press to blow up the whole Union Army, they would have pressed it. They were at war. And so, I mean, you can laugh at it, but it's a truth. Change is sometimes is difficult, and it takes a kind of arrogance to get it done. And there's no point in mocking it because it's proven throughout history that that's what works. So mock it all you want, but history laughs at you.
That's a heavy burden.
Well, as we know what the burden is, right? I'm saying it's a bad idea to procreate. I'm saying other people should say those very words. It's a bad idea. Don't mess with that. You're not God, so don't play God. It's a simple enough slogan. You're not God, so stop playing God. There. That's not too complicated, is it? For somebody else to say, yeah, that makes sense to me. People shouldn't be playing God, especially people who don't even have $25 in their pocket. They certainly shouldn't be playing God because it's quite obvious they're not God. Some drug addicts certainly shouldn't be playing God because it's obvious they're not God. Some crack whore, some dumb slut. Yeah, none of these people have any power or control or ability. They have no merit to justify their arrogance in saying, I'm going to create life. They're not even Dr. Frankenstein. At least Dr. Frankenstein went to medical school. He had some hope of making some kind of thing that worked. These assholes have no hope. They have no realistic prospect of doing it right. They have no evidence of any kind of competence. They are dysfunctional in the world that exists, and yet they want to produce children that they think somehow will be competent. Does that make any sense? No, it makes no sense. And I think everybody should be able to say that. Anybody with a little bit of intelligence should be able to say that the people who are failing at life shouldn't be producing life.
He says that very strongly. Like he's the only one who understands the quote. Only I know the value of this suffering.
And I was, take out something out of context and play with it. So that was just such a game you just played. All right? This suffering, okay, was the key word. And so I'm talking about, I'm the only one who's going to know who I am in the future, right? The future me. Okay? That the person just like me who's going to be raised by natalists and raised in a stupid, idiotic world and is going to come to the conclusion on their own that life is stupid and they've been suckered. All right? I'm the one who can act in his interest now, where it matters. I'm the one that can prevent his existence. He can't prevent his existence. I can. And I can do that because I understand him. Get it? You have to understand the victim before you can act in the victim's interests. Shit. Not complicated.
Huge statement that he's taken on this burden of responsibility for humanity, he feels.
Now, in that case, I was taking on responsibility for the victim. I'm saying you don't have a right to create, that you don't have a right to impose upon. You have no right to make that victim. That's the argument being made. I'm taking responsibility in the sense that I'm saying I'm going to speak now for that victim. You're going to hear that victim's voice now, okay, before you violate it. All right? Because I'm going to try to prevent the violation by making you hear the victim say, don't do it, shithead. I'm not going to appreciate it.
So, and thus, based on these two front bits and this death and suffering and everything and stresses, which are all part of the rat's life and is also part of human life, he's drawing this conclusion that it's intractable. Now, firstly, and again, this is where the analogies fail, and because we are not rats, yeah.
Oh, well, you can say we're not, but yeah. Why? In name only, we're not rats. How are we not rats? Oh, we do mathematics, that makes a difference? No. What, we watch American Idol, that makes a difference? No. They do the same thing we do. They satisfy needs created by biology and psychology. They have active psychologies and certainly the same physical urges we have. So don't pretend you're not a fucking rat. You're a fucking rat. All right, and so he goes into this thing here like it's intractable, and then the rest of this video is going to be him talking about how great things are and how things are so much better. Well, let's also understand, though, that the amount of life you live as a healthy human being is probably diminished, actually. So for all our longer lives, we don't necessarily have better lives because we spend more of our life now disabled. Okay, more human consciousness is in the form of a disabled human being than at any other point in history. Is that a good thing? I mean, it's good from a stance that, oh yes, we've preserved lives, but is that always a good thing? Because you've diminished the quality of the lives. You're fatter and dumber and slower and sicker and less healthy than at any point in history, theoretically, right? You spend more time dying now, like a lot more time, not a little more time, a lot more time dying. Okay, so you've made the dying segment of life huge by comparison. In the past, you spent a week dying of smallpox or plague or some other horrible disease, but it was a week. You'll spend now decades dying of cancer or something else. And you think that's a better quality of life? I say bullshit to that. I don't think you've improved the quality of the actual conscious sentient experience. We spent more time as healthy, strong, young humans in the past than we do now. Now we spend most of our time as aging, falling aparting, degrading organism. We have more conscious human life is in a degraded condition now than it was in the past, ironically. That bit of progress, although I understand the intent of it, was not necessarily a good idea.
For starters, this means that nobody has responsibility over us, and we're not purely
yeah, we are purely in control. It's a fact. Okay, we have the technology. We flew to the moon. We have the technology to decide whether we live or die. We have condoms. We have birth control. We understand the mechanism. Now we do it on purpose. It doesn't just happen to us anymore. Nature isn't in control. We're in control. All right, so it's just bullshit to say we're not in control of the laboratory experiment. We are in control of the laboratory experiment. We can pass laws at any minute deciding how people are going to raise kids. We pass laws saying they have to be educated and they have to be immunized and they have to have different things done. And we've done that exercising our control. We have control. It's our experiment now. There's no one else to blame. There's no force to blame. It's all now about human will, human understanding, human intent is now deciding.
We're in this cycle of reproduction, like the rats might do. We actually have impulse control, and this has allowed us, I would say, to make great strides forward in history. We eliminated slavery, give women the vote.
Right, and the next one on the list is going to be give up the ghost here. Give up this bullshit notion that you're going anywhere or doing anything, but basically just whacking off the most expensive way possible. Your satisfactions and gratifications are preposterously expensive. Every breath you take is created by a biosphere that screams and suffers hours and hours and hours of torturous horror for every fucking breath you take. These are facts we now know. We now know this is not a game to be played by anything intelligent. Only an asshole plays a game this sloppy, this messy. Okay, you're not going to be able to make the world into a place where deserve has something to do with it, and you're certainly not going to be able to create life under the rules of consent. Fundamental, basic parts of ethical contract, and you can't do it. You're never going to be able to make it that way. Well, not never. You could clone yourselves and then pre-program your psychology, so you'd be just you, and you'd be the only ape capable of torturing yourself. So then you could be your own victim. You could have elephant man disease and be a billionaire, and it would all be you who had to suffer it. That might be just desserts, as they say. But we know you're not going to get to that world because that would require a level of organization and sophistication you're never going to achieve. So that's just a pipe dream. You're far more likely to blow yourselves up than you are to ever have a world where you can create pre-consent through cloning.
You know, there's not so much hatred in Britain particularly, and it's lessening. You know, gay rights is a growing movement.
Yeah, so is Islamabad. So that's not going anywhere.
You know, human rights have been enacted in law, etc., etc. This all marks progress. That
Yeah, minor, meager progress, right? I mean, really the almost dumbest kind of progress. Like, oh, it took us 10,000 years to figure out it's not nice to own each other. Oh, gee. And you know, likewise amount of time to figure out that women are more than just baby making machines that you fuck. Oh, gee. That they have a brain and they have hopes and aspirations and ambitions just like the males do. 10,000 years to figure that out? That's my definition of colossal failure.
our impulse control and our sentience gives us above and beyond rats. So this is a critical way, another critical way that the analogy fails.
Well, again, you say the analogy fails. The analogy to the rat is not, again, whether you can watch American Idol or whether you can whack off to the David or something, or the Sistine Chapel thingy or whatever. Whatever your thing is, okay? The fact that you can appreciate things that a rat can't appreciate, that's not the argument. The argument is that rats are sentient beings. They have psychologies. They have ambitions, horninesses, desires, attractions. They have moments where they're in bliss and moments where they're in absolute horror and fear and pain and suffering. And by those major and important standards, we are the same. The basic design is the same. The mammal design is the same fundamentally. And the change, the distinction between modern man and primitive man, or modern man and the ape, is of no consequence when you have them strapped on the gurney and you're about to, stick rods in places people don't want rods stuck. In that circumstance, there's not going to be a distinction. Okay, there just isn't.
So, to believe too much, the analogy is useful in terms of allowing me to understand Gary's reasoning, but it's also very useful in drawing a contrast in every way in which the analogy doesn't relate to humanity, and in those ways that it doesn't relate to humanity are the ways in which Gary's argument fails.
Well, again, you're claiming a failure of the argument. How so? Again, so you claim the chimpanzee on the gurney doesn't feel what the human being feels? Is that your claim, that if I do surgery without anesthesia, that you're going to scream louder? No, I don't think so.
It begs the question. I mean, if you're going to oppose, lots of people do like to think things are getting worse. It begs the question: how do you want to measure it, for starters? If you want to have that out.
Well, again, that's not my argument anyway. This better, worse crap is not my argument. Okay, I'm not saying that things aren't better. You said intractable was proven by this minor progress. I'm saying there's no way. Draw me a picture of your future. Okay, I've asked people to do this many times. Write me a gross outline of a science fiction story of what the future is going to look like. How you're going to take the human animal, the ambitious, competitive, greedy, selfish bastard. You're going to give him unlimited starship capacities. Explain to me how you're going to survive as a civilization. Okay, freedom, and technological freedom, access to technology, free access to technology, okay, and the human hate. How are you going to combine those two? The propensity towards violence. We're still fighting wars. We're still murdering people to resolve disputes. And you're going to tell me that everything's okay? Oh no, I'm going to tell you, you are so ready for the surprise, because the jack is going to pop out of the fucking box and he's going to laugh his ass off as your ignorance in thinking you have some way of overcoming these fundamental brick wall problems. You are not going to solve this problem. As long as you have a competitive, horny human being, and that's the only kind of human being it's worth having, right? I mean, if you take the passion, if you cut our nuts off, it's not going to be a game any man's going to want to play, right? He's not going to want to play the game without his nuts. So, and if you don't cut his nuts off, you've got to restrict his freedom. And so you're going to have to live in there's some sort of big brother controlled world, okay, to have a future. That's just a fact. That's the brick wall sitting right in front of you, and you don't have any way to jump over it. You don't have any way to drive around it. You have nothing to do but plow right the fuck into it. And that's the intractable truth I'm talking about. So defeat that truth, not the one you made up, that somehow I argued that we haven't made any progress. Of course we've made some progress, but I'm saying the progress is minute, okay, and much of it is delusional. Thinking that somehow it's progress, that I can spend now in the modern world, I can spend 20 years in the nursing home shitting myself. Ah, isn't that brilliant? No, that's not very brilliant.
Argument that things are getting worse. I recently heard it said, well, name when. When were things better? Yeah? You know, and it's hard to say, really. When you look at the world wealth, the world life expectancies, the world development in education.
Oh yeah, I mean, you could just look at the last 50 years and say people were certainly better off in 1970 in many respects. They had more of a chance of earning a living and having a middle class life than they have now. Now they just have a chance of being in preposterous debt. So by that standard, you're going to be in big trouble. And again, just by adding up the amount of moments, the amount of conscious moments experienced on Earth right now by human beings, I would argue that they're spending a higher percentage of those moments on some medication to get them through the day than at any other time in history. They're weaker and less content than they were even in the worst of times in the past, just because of the consequence of this obsession with the length of a life rather than the quality of the life. And again, what's the quality of your life if you have to work 15 hours a day? What quality of life is there for a Chinaman, working 12 hours a day? Is there any quality of life? No, there's no quality of life.
In balancing of sex rights, female, women rights, and gay rights, I say the balance is progress.
Well, I'd say that those subjects are almost, trivial by comparison to the more substantial rights, like, okay, now we have billions of chickens in factory farms, which we didn't have 50 or 100 years ago. Animals just raised by machines, fodder for the engine of humanity. That's not progress. We're hunting seals, right? A couple 100,000 seals a year shot, farmed in nature. Okay, nobody cares about how they die. There's no rules about how they get killed. No rules about their welfare. because they're wild animals that we farm. So yeah, they only live to be 4 years old, and we just take advantage. That's not progress. You think whales are better off than they were 200, 500 years ago? I don't think whales are better off.
I don't know. I thought this argument, this rat analogy, was going somewhere to show how rights are connected with purposes.
No, that wasn't the purpose of the analogy. The purpose of the analogy is quite simple, to illustrate that if this thing was your responsibility, if you were responsible for all the negative, for all the pain and suffering being caused, and you had nothing, you had no evidence that the experiment had any purpose whatsoever, that it had nothing positive was going to be produced by this stupid torture. Okay, you'd recognize the torture and you say, yeah, let's just not have the experiment. Let's quit making rats and forcing them through this grist mill. Let's quit turning them into shit for no good reason. And that's what I meant by responsibility. I just saying that if it was a game that you were responsible for, and that the suffering was, the blood was on your hands, you'd see the blood and you'd say, I don't want this blood on my hands. And you'd turn it off.
I don't think it did that, if I'm right in that reading. You know, the whole, what I read from the dialogue so far is that it's in Mendham's The Philosophy is an emotional reaction to a dissatisfaction that there's no purpose.
Yeah, well, whatever. See, I mean, I just find that so offensive. So yeah, fuck you. I mean, really, it's not. It's an emotional reaction. Of course, you're going to emotionally react. When the Nazis are coming to town, they're going to kill. They killed all your relatives. They've taken your kids away. They've taken your wife away. You're supposed to have an emotional reaction. Yeah, I'm going to emotionally react to the fact that you people seem incapable of understanding anything. That evolution means unintelligent design, and it means that it doesn't really, the forces that are in control don't have any understanding of compassion. They don't have any understanding of torture or suffering. These are irrelevant words to the forces in control. And you assholes just seem to not pay any attention to that fact. It's a glaring, huge, gigantic fact. And you insensitive, sadistic lunatics can't seem to get a tiniest bit of a grip and say, well, maybe I'll try to account for that. Maybe I will explain how human beings are doing something so fucking magnificent that they can justify the torture of those sentient beings. And you haven't even come close to doing that, and yet you will patronize me? No, I'm sorry, fella. You're way short of an illogical explanation for why you would vote for keeping an engine running that's consuming a lot more gas than anything it's producing. It has no wheels, no steering wheel, it doesn't have windows, and you're sitting there saying, yeah, go turn the car on. It has no hope of going a goddamn place, and all it's going to do is grind up that gasoline, and the gasoline is suffering, for the purpose of the metaphor, in case you can't understand. Stupid fuck.
Just in life. And I've said this time and time again, that if it's a true and logical argument that we have an obligation to wipe out life.
Oh, he says that's a paradox. Okay, that life purpose would be to wipe itself out. No, it's not the purpose of life. It doesn't exist for that intention. There was no intention. Remember, it's evolution. So there is no paradox. There is no conundrum. There is no blah blah blah. That's all just little games you people play. Okay, and that's all it is. It's just a word game you're playing. Okay, the fact is that yeah, we're smart enough to figure out the game isn't worth playing. We're smart enough to say, yes, it's tic-tac-toe, stupid, and there's blood on it, okay? There's no way to win it, and there's blood all over it, and yes, we're capable of being smart enough to realize that's what made us, that's what we're part of, and we don't need to do that. And that isn't a paradox or a conundrum or any of those other things. The universe isn't going to collapse on itself because we draw the conclusion that the best thing we can do is quit being us. That's right. Gee. Okay, but no philosophical conundrum required. Again, you pervert the truth. You propagandize by saying the purpose of life is to end life. No, that's not the purpose of life. Okay, that's a consequence of living and being logical, is understanding that it has no function and that it's expensive to run. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I got that in. That's why I quit playing his video. I'm running out of time. Any second now.
That translates and constitutes a logical purpose to life. And I find that a little bit ironic, that the purpose of life is, and it's an ironic, it's worse than an irony, it's a paradox. And you know what that means. By definition, it means something's wrong, yeah?
Yeah. Well, again, that's just word games, just playing games, right? It's not the purpose of life. Life doesn't exist to eradicate life. It's just the fact that it's a dumb system, and the dumb system has acquired enough understanding to understand that it was built badly, and there's no way to reconstruct it. There's no way to take the bad ingredients and turn them into something. Need can't be turned into anything good. It's just stupid. Don't create it. No need does not need to exist. It's just the truth. Okay? Don't make a problem, then you don't have to solve a problem. Don't break it, and you won't have to fix it. Nature works by breaking the peace and quiet. Okay? And then obliging it to try to reinstall the peace and quiet.
That the purpose of life is to disrupt life. That points.
Yeah, that's. I didn't want to go that far into the subject, but I mean that's basically the equation. Anyway, he ends here anyway. So I guess we.